That voice, man. We should just have him keep reading the Bible and leaving half an hour. Then I get up here with my old man voice and I'm going to preach like this for a while. Yeah, sheesh. You can't schedule Micaiah as often. He makes me look bad. Okay, so I want to take a little poll to start the sermon out, okay? Who thinks that prayer is important? Okay, some of you don't have your hands up. I will pray for you. Lord forgives you. Who thinks reading the Bible is important? Okay, let's get a little less spiritual. Who thinks watching TV is important? Some of you are like, why did I put my hand up? Too fast. Who thinks family is important? Who thinks pets are important? Okay, who of you think pets are part of the family and you treat them like humans? You're the ones, okay. Okay. I grew up with rednecks in the country, so let's do one more. Who thinks physical fitness is important? Okay. Okay, let's revise this survey a little bit. Now, not what you think is important, but this is what you spend time on during your week. So if I could see your weekly schedule, how you actually spend your time, instead of what you say is important, this is if I didn't know you at all, and I just looked at your schedule, what would I think is important to you based on just what you spend your time on? Be honest, okay? So, who acts like prayer is important? Okay, yeah, with how much time you put towards it. You know, not think, you do. Now, who acts like reading the Bible is important? Okay, who acts like TV is important? This counts your doom scrolling on your phone, by the way. That's the version of TV now, right? We just watch tiny boxes by ourselves instead of one big box together. Okay, who acts like pets are important? Okay. Jesus gets in an interesting argument in this part of the Bible. And we're getting back to the book of Matthew, and we're going to just walk through the end of the book here from now on, now that Christmas is over. When we think of Jesus, we think of just a really nice, chill guy who just went around healing people, helping people, saying nice things, not really, making waves or causing problems. But Jesus was a real problem for a lot of people. Like, he was a troublemaker. He was such a punk, he ended up getting crucified by the government, which was a form of government execution, right? Harmless, nice people tend not to get crucified by the government. Do you agree? Okay, so this is one of those passages in the Bible where Jesus isn't so agreeable and he isn't so soft-handed and nice, but he gets in an argument with these people called the Pharisees. Now, who the Pharisees were in the ancient world is they were basically priests and politicians combined into one. So they were the leaders in the community. They kind of made governmental decisions on a smaller scale. They also taught the Bible, the Old Testament. They would preach in their synagogues, which is their version of the churches. Very influential. Some of them tend to be very wealthy, like some pastors, right? They got private jets so they can do more ministry. I'm still trying to get the board to buy me my golden urinal, but they keep saying no. But most pastors don't make a lot of money, but there's this level that make way too much money, right? Well, same back then. Some Pharisees were very, very wealthy, although a lot of them weren't. So the Pharisees were this very influential, high-status class of religious politicians. And Jesus is clashing with them in this passage. And they're having a disagreement. And what they're disagreeing on is what matters. They're disagreeing on what's important. And it gets so crazy that Jesus says, my heavenly Father didn't plant these people. He didn't plant those Pharisees. Now, what does that mean? If you go back a few chapters, he told the story about there's wheat and there's weeds that grow up in a field. And what happened is the enemy came and planted all these weeds in his enemy's field to mess up his crop. And so the workers were saying, should we pull out the weeds and weed and then harvest everything or what? He goes, no, just cut it all down and we'll separate it after we harvest. But it was a metaphor. And the metaphor was he's going to let everyone grow up together, and then at the end of time when Jesus comes back, everyone's going to get judged at the same time. So he kind of categorizes people into two groups. Weeds, people who God planted, and weeds. And who planted the weeds? He says the evil one, which is code for Satan. And so when he says these people weren't planted by my Father in heaven, what's he saying? He's saying they're weeds that were planted by Satan. So Jesus says, yeah, these guys are planted by Satan. They do Satan's work, and they nullify the commands of God with their stupid, made-up rules. They're a bunch of morons who lead people astray, and they're destroying the spiritual life of the nation. The disciples come up and say, did you know when you said those things, it offended them? Yeah, I think he knows that. I think it was on purpose. So here's what I want to do. I want to see what did they value versus what did Jesus value. Like what was important to the Pharisees that made this clash of ideas, and what was important to Jesus. And here's where we're going to end up today is I'm thinking we should probably side with Jesus. You guys with me? Yeah, two of you are totally for that. That's so funny. Well, I hope the rest of you will convert during the sermon. So Matthew chapter 15, verse 1. Some Pharisees and teachers of the religious law, remember these are the political religious elite. Some Pharisees and teachers of the religious law now arrived from Jerusalem to see Jesus. Now, where was Jesus at? He was in this place called Galilee, which was in the north, and Jerusalem is farther south. So it's like these guys came up from the Tri-Cities to come and talk to Jesus. It's about 120 miles, something like that, right? No roads like we have, no cars, no trains, no planes, no electric motorcycles, I was going to say electric bicycles, no motorcycles. They walked or they rode animals for 120 miles. How long would it take you to walk 120 miles? See, it would take me about never. I just wouldn't do it, That's crazy. So they walked 120 miles to talk to Jesus and question him. And that whole time they were scheming with each other because these guys are so intelligent. They know the Old Testament backwards and forwards, and they also knew everything everybody had said about the Old Testament. So there's this thing called the tradition of the elders, we'll call it. And, when I study a Bible passage, I'll put the Bible passage in front of me. I'll study it on my own. I'll try and figure, this is what it says. This is what it means. But as I'm reading the Bible, I have a bunch of questions. Like, what's a Pharisee, right? Where's Jerusalem compared to where Jesus is at? And I'll write a bunch of questions about the passage, and this is stuff I don't know. So then I go research it. One place I researched this is a book called Commentaries. And the Commentaries is just a fat, nerdy book written by nerds who live in a nerdery. And they write this huge book with all kinds of details. They set it down. And if I'm reading a book about Matthew, for example, commentary will be, maybe 8 inches tall in 2 volumes. Like one of the commentaries I have is that big. And I'll read several commentaries on one Bible book. And your preachers and pastors commonly do this. So Matthew's 28 chapters long. It's, I don't know how many pages in your Bible. But I'll read thousands of pages of what people have said about Matthew and historians have learned about the book. These guys read all that and they remembered it all. But they didn't read commentaries written today. They knew what this guy said about what that guy said, about what this guy said, and about what this guy said. For me, I'm like some guy in a book somewhere said this, I think I remember. It's probably about Matthew, maybe not. Okay, that's my memory. They would remember who said, who interpreted whom, who interpreted whom, who interpreted whom on which passage. So memory, crazy memories. Some of them had memorized the first 5 books of the Bible. Have you read those books? This guy begat that guy. This guy begat. There were 10,000 people from this tribe, 30,000 from that tribe. They knew it all. So they're wicked smart. So all these nerds get together, and they're walking 120 miles, and they're like, okay, if Jesus says this, I'm going to do that. And they're doing this mock debate, so they think, we're going to get there. We're going to make Jesus look so stupid. Let's see how it works out for them. So they show up, and they actually ask Jesus this. This is the thing they choose to argue with Jesus about. They walked the whole way and they thought, okay, here's our silver bullet. Why do your disciples disobey our age-old tradition? For they ignore our tradition of ceremonial hand washing before they eat. So this was really important back then. We want to know what the Bible means now, right? And so we have rules about that. I've learned some rules in the past. Like once I learned that you're not supposed to wear hats in church. Right? You can leave it on. You're good. I learned that. So that's a tradition of the elders. It was an older person who told my friend, you shouldn't wear a hat in church. Okay? Now, I didn't know the Bible yet, so I just assumed there was a verse in the Bible somewhere that said you can't wear hats in church, and I didn't know it. There's no verse that says that. So I don't get upset if you wear hats in church. Unless the 49ers hats. Then I don't forgive you, and there's other rules I've learned. Like you shouldn't listen to certain music. You shouldn't watch R-rated movies. Like you can't listen to hip-hop or classic rock. Some other rules. There's certain ways you dress. There's certain ways you talk. And really, sometimes the fear of going to a new church, at least for me when I was back in the day finding churches, we lived in the Tri-Cities for a while, starting our own church. And so on Sundays, we would go to several churches on Sundays to see what they were up to. And what I realized, a lot of them had a lot of these rules, but the rules had more to do with you fitting in with that group than it had to do with you fitting with Jesus. And so it wasn't about, hey, are you a Christian? It's like, are you our kind of Christian? That's what matters. Like, you're going to fit in with us? Are you also the kind of Christian that knows that wearing hats is wrong? Are you also kind of the Christian that knows which political party to vote for every election? Are you also the kind of Christian who knows, and you could just go down the line? And we went to this one church. I've told the story before, so I'll tell it quickly. It was by Westgate Elementary in Kennewick, and we were walking home. Me and my friend Dan, and I think Chris was with us too. So we go into this church, and we just want to use the bathroom, and they're having church, which was awesome because it was evening. And it turns out this is Pentecostal church, and they do church like every night because they're intense. And we just want to use the bathroom. Well, we went in, used the bathroom, came out. This lady chided us for using the bathroom. She said, this is the house of God. If you come here, it's to worship. And we were 3 Christians, but she didn't know that. So I looked past her into the congregation just to see what was going on, and I just saw this sea of white and silver hair. Now, that made me feel a little out of place because we were younger at the time. We were early 20s. So I felt a little out of place. I felt bad for disrespecting the church because that's not what we intended to do. At that time, we were naive enough to think that a church would be cool if you just want to use your bathroom and move on. We didn't realize it was offensive. So we saw that we didn't really feel like we were part of that group. And then she rebuked us for using the bathroom. And then she never actually invited us to church either. So imagine if we weren't Christians with our own walk with God, what that would have gave us the impression of who Jesus is and what the church was like, right? But those are rules that determine whether you're in the group or whether you're out the group. And every church has those, except ours because we're awesome. No, but a lot of churches do have those, and a lot of Christians have those. So I would consider those traditions of the elders, right? Stuff that people think are important. Like, is it important not to wear a hat in church? For some people it is. Why is it important for them? Because they want you to know that this is a special place, that God lives in a special way, and you should honor God. You should revere God. You shouldn't be flippant with God, which some of that I'm down with, right? You too? I agree with some of that. Like, you should be reverent of the Lord. You shouldn't be disrespectful to God. But the tradition of that elder in that church was that the hat was the disrespectful thing. And so what these guys had done is they had learned all the commentaries, all the things people said about the things people said about the things that people said about the Bible. And they had accumulated thousands of rules about what it meant to be a good person devoted to God. So don't work on the Sabbath. Is that a rule? Yeah, is it in the Bible? Yeah, it's in there. So what does that mean? Like if I go to church Sunday and go home and I work on the house all day, is that working on the Sabbath? I'm not getting paid for it. Right? We don't know. And so what they did is all those nerds got together and they said, well, here's what it means. You can only walk this many steps. If your animal falls into a pit, you can help it out if it's in imminent danger, but if it's probably fine for a day, you should leave it. If somebody's sick, you shouldn't heal them today. If you can heal, you should heal them tomorrow because healing is a form of work. And they had all these rules on top of rules about how to live faithfully to the Bible. And so here's their silver bullet. They walk 120 miles about, they get to Jesus and say, how come you guys don't follow our rules? Now this is Jesus. First of all, he's God, right? He is. Secondly, he's this redneck from Galilee who doesn't listen to the hootin' tootin' highfalutin rules of these snotty people. He's blue collar. Like, this guy swings a hammer for a living. He's a carpenter and a mason. These nerds from the nerdery are going to come down. They can't even frame a wall. They're going to tell this guy how to live his life. That's not going to fly. Thirdly, he's God. I know that was number one. I did that on purpose. So I have to emphasize my point. He's God, which means he's really smart, and he might know the Bible better than these fools, right? So, why do your disciples disobey our age-old tradition, for they ignore our tradition of ceremonial hand washing before they eat? So they saw disciples weren't washing their hands like the guys said they would. There's no rule in the Bible that says you're supposed to wash your hands before you eat. Washing has to do with other things, like before you enter the temple and stuff like that. No rule about washing hands before you eat. But it's one they decided was important at some point. And so this is a rule that they were upset the disciples weren't following. So here's Jesus' reply. And why do you, by your traditions, violate the direct commandments of God? Whoops. They might have tussled with the wrong guy. So here's what Jesus says. They said, how come you don't follow our rules? And he said, how come you're comfortable following your rules and violating the obvious direct things God has told you to do? For example, you're supposed to honor your parents, are you not? And in Jesus' culture, no welfare state, no social security, no kind of social safety net. The only way old people got taken care of was by their children. No nursing homes, no nothing. You lived at home, you died at home, it was multi-generational homes. That's just how it went. And so you were supposed to provide for your parents, and honoring your parents was part of that. So he says, well, what you guys do is you say there's a tax break if you want to devote something to God, and so you don't have to honor your parents with the sacrifice of your stuff. So what you can do is you can say, I can't help you with this stuff because I've dedicated that to God. Conveniently, as Pharisees, your salary comes from the things that were dedicated to God, and now your parents are left out in the rain. What the hell is wrong with you? And I'm saying that literally. What the hell, right, derived from the evil one is wrong with you? That's Jesus' response. I'll read it word for word so you realize what I paraphrased. So he says, and why do you, by your traditions, violate the direct commandments of God? For instance, God says, honor your father and mother, and anyone who speaks disrespectfully of father and mother must be put to death. Man, I wish that was still enforced when my kids were adolescents. That would have been a good verse once in a while. But you say it's all right for people to say to their parents, sorry, I can't help you, for I have vowed to give to God what I would have given to you. In this way, you say they don't need to honor their parents. And so you cancel the word of God for the sake of your own tradition. You hypocrites. This is where he gets hardcore. What's a hypocrite? It's a person who pretends to be in public somebody they're not in private. So he calls them hypocrites. Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. So he's saying this part of the Old Testament I'm about to quote, Isaiah wrote about you guys. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship is a farce, for they teach man-made ideas as commands from God. End of the argument. So then Jesus calls the crowd. So he calls not just the Pharisees who he's been arguing with, but he calls the whole crowd over, and he starts talking to them. So what's the core conflict here, real quick? The conflict is the Pharisees are valuing their traditions more than they're valuing actual direct obedience to God. Although they thought it was the same, Jesus disagreed. Jesus said there's clear things in the Bible which you are supposed to do, and you get caught up in all these little silly rules and you focus on the wrong thing. And so what you end up doing is you end up ignoring people and even your own family, your own parents, for the sake of following the rule, and you encourage other people to do the same. You teach other people they can dedicate things to God, and if it's dedicated to God, they don't have to provide for the parents with that. I'll do a quick application here. Some churches do have that vibe where they're just really judgmental, right? You've probably been to them before. And a lot of people don't like going to new churches because they're afraid of being judged. Which, first of all, it's not just church. It's any place where humans are. That's where judgment happens. Right? It's just in church, there's a little extra stank on it because, one, they're not supposed to be judgmental in church. Sometimes they are. And two, they always think God agrees with them when they judge you. Right? But humans are judgmental. They are. Tell me at your workplace, nobody's gossiping about nobody because they all have love and acceptance. Right? Tell me your family doesn't gossip about each other because it's just love and acceptance all around. I mean, humans are judgmental, Christian or not. But we do feel like the church should be different, right? And so some people are afraid to go to church because they're afraid to get judged. I had that fear when I was a new Christian. And the first Christian church I ever attended as a new Christian was this one, Timberview. And I came to Christ when I was 20 years old. It was from a very non-Christian background. And I was steeped in all kinds of weird cultures that didn't exist in Chattaroy. Now, I was steeped in some cultures that exist in Chattaroy because I grew up with Okies and rednecks. But I was really into hip-hop music. Back then, my pants were really baggy and I sagged them. I walked with that gangster lean, you know what I mean? And I was built different. And so I came to Timberview and nobody looked like me. And I felt very out of place. One, because I was an insecure 20-year-old and I always felt out of place, right? But two, I was in this new weird place and I had this preconception of what church is like. Church is filled with mean people that just judge everybody all the time. And I knew some Christians in high school which were not nice people. So I was like, I don't want to go to a whole room full of people like that. But I finally did because my friends were annoying and they got me to go. So I came here. Nobody looked like me. Racially, I was different. The way I clothed was different. My perception was the class was different too because I grew up very poor. I was in a single mother household. And I felt like everybody here was rich. Why? One, because they were white and all white people are rich. I knew that for a fact at the time. Except for my white family. They were the only poor ones, apparently. But two, there were some nice cars in the parking lot. And people dressed up kind of nice for church compared to what I was wearing. And so I had all these preconceptions about what church was going to be like here. So I came, I was very nervous. And it was very bizarre to me when everybody was so nice. They were so nice. I mean, they welcomed me in. They were very friendly to me. They asked me questions about myself. I tried to find things I hated about church. And I found a couple, like the music. You know, you can always find something if you're an evil, self-absorbed person like I was. So I found a couple things, but man, I got to tell you, the people here were fantastic. They were great. And as I became more mature and grew up a little bit and learned more about the people, I realized there was a lot more variety of people in the church than I thought there was, which is cool too. But not all churches are like that, unfortunately. So people are scared to go to church because they're scared to get judged, and you're scared to learn what rules there are and what extra rules you have to follow to fit in. And what that does sometimes, when churches have that kind of a culture, is it violates the greater commands of God for their lesser rules. So what's more important? That my friend not wear a hat in church, or that my friend was in church sincerely wanting to worship God with other Christians? So is it worth driving my friend away from church so he knows you're not supposed to wear hats so he's no longer worshiping with other Christians on Sundays because he had a bad church experience? No, you're violating an obvious greater command of God to love people than you are to holding them to the traditions of your elders. But there's a balance, right? On the one hand, you cannot sacrifice future generations of the church at your idol of tradition. On the other hand, young people are dumb, and if you let them take over their church, they'll ruin it. That was too blunt, probably. I was going to give an example, but I'm not going to. But there's a balance to be had between the innovation of younger people and their impulse to innovate and change, and between things that are meaningful to people that are already working. There's a balance there. There's a second balance too, though. And this balance is a balance of accepting people and letting them be in church and focusing on the greater commands of God, but also knowing that God still has commandments. Right? God still wants us to be a certain kind of people. We tolerate everybody, we love everybody, and God loves you too, and he also loves you too much to leave you where you're at. And so what the rest of this passage talks about is, what is purity then? What does it mean to be holy? What does it mean to be good? What are the commands of God that are important? Because remember, he's conflicting with these Pharisees over all these extra traditions they have, right? And the rest of this conversation is, well, what are the greater commands of God that we shouldn't violate? So Jesus calls people aside and he starts teaching them. Verse 10, Jesus called the crowd to come and hear. Listen, he said, try to understand. This is important. It's not what goes into your mouth that defiles you. You are defiled by words that come out of your mouth. This is one of the most brilliant things I've ever read by any thinker ever. You're not defiled by what goes into your mouth, but what goes out. Which was the opposite of what they thought. They thought you could only eat certain foods. You know those bacon cinnamon rolls out there? They couldn't eat those. Which, praise the Lord for the cross, right? Because of Jesus, we can eat bacon now, and I think it's great. But they really had rules that were important about what to eat and what not to eat, and it had to do with being accepted by God. And you think, well, those are weird, dumb rules. Well, yeah, because you're a Christian on the other side of this stuff. But like I said, some Christians have silly rules too, and we've already talked about a bunch of them. So how do you discern them? Okay, so first of all, Jesus says purity doesn't have to do with the things you eat, but with the things you say. And he explains himself. He says, down to verse 16, don't you understand yet? Jesus asks, anything you eat passes through the stomach, goes in the sewer, but the words you speak come from the heart. That's what defiles you. All these evil thoughts that have all these different iterations, like murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, lying, slander, all that, that's what defiles you. Here's why this is so genius. When I talk about something, I think I'm talking about that thing. So for example, when I was a newer Christian, I'd go to a church and I'd say, what's with this music? How come there's no hip-hop churches anywhere? How come no one likes awesome music? It's all this like old fuddy-duddy stuff, which is ironic because now hymns are my favorite kind of religious music. And not the modernized ones, which always make them worse. I'm talking the old school ones that stick to the old school tunes. Which is funny, I'm that way now. Because in the beginning, I was like, what's with all this terrible music? I thought I was talking about the music. When I spoke, I said, there's the music, and I'm describing that thing over there. It's not awesome because it's not hip-hop. I thought I was describing that. Jesus says, no. What comes out of your mouth actually is a picture of what's inside your heart. So it turns out I wasn't describing the music, I was describing my own heart. And what I expressed in that moment, and I didn't have the self-awareness to know this, is I was saying that all those good-natured people up there who have trained for hours this week to try and lead us in this music, that their sacrifice of worship is not worthy enough for me. And this service is really all about me today. As if they were singing to me. Is that a spiritual problem? Yes, it was. And eventually I had to deal with it. But isn't that so smart? Jesus says this, that you're not describing the thing, you're actually showing everybody a picture of your heart. So when I judge another human being and I say, man, why you like this? Why you like that? I might not be talking about them. I might be instead expressing my need to control everything. I might be expressing my anxiety and fear with the world and appearing more powerful than I am so I can trick everybody into knowing I'm not scared. I might be anxious and pretend like it's a prayer request when I really want an opportunity to share my worries with people without being honest about my fear. I might be trying to tear somebody else down, but when I couch it in a prayer request, it sounds spiritually so I can talk more crap about them than I should be able to. I mean, I might be doing all kinds of things, but I'm not necessarily describing the thing I'm describing. It's actually a picture of my own heart. That's a hard pill to swallow, isn't it? That's a hard pill to swallow, man. So what do we do with this heart? Like, I can do a couple things pretty easy. To fit in with this church would be very easy. Okay, just don't cuss. too loud while you're at church, right? That's one rule. It helps if you kind of stand up close to when everyone else stands up and sit down about the same time, right? If you don't dress too crazy, you'll kind of fit in with us because we're all kinds of different people. Let's see, it helps if you vote Republican, right? You fit in better with this particular group if you vote Republican than if you don't. Like if somebody came in here and started slinging around all kinds of non-Republican ideas, the Bible study would get very quiet probably. Right? So it's pretty easy to fit in with this social group. But that's not our concern. Our concern is fitting in with Jesus. And we want everyone to conform to the image of Christ, because in doing that we'll become one and we'll be drawn closer to each other as we're drawn close to him. So that means attending to our own heart and the greater things. So what does purity mean? Well, Jesus' fundamental disagreement with the Pharisees is that they were valuing the wrong things and they cared about their traditions, which was actually violating what would purify their heart. Now, the old school word for this is holiness. Everyone say that, holiness. Now say hagios. Yeah, not adios, hagios. That's a Greek word for holiness. Holiness is this old idea. We don't use the word a lot anymore, but we still have the concept of purity and pollution, right? And that's really what holiness is about. So here's what holiness is. And I'm going to kind of walk around this, and then it's going to be awesome when we get there, I hope. Holiness, apparently, when it comes to Jesus' philosophy and his ideas, isn't just honoring the traditions of the elders. Apparently, it's something different. In fact, in another gospel in this situation, he says, by saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean, which was even more radical. So bacon, back on the table. Here's what holiness really is. One aspect of holiness, okay? Because it's a very full, rich concept. Maybe about 2 or 3 parts of it. Here's the first one. I made a new friend once, and it had great prospects of being a new bestie. You guys know you should all have friends, right? Like friendship makes life better, and you should have spiritual friends because that makes your spiritual life better. But getting friends is a hassle because people are crazy, right? And they're insane. But I found, so the way you kind of get acquainted with somebody, you get to know them well, you kind of feel out the friendship, eventually they're dependable, you're dependable for them, you share some interests, you become friends, you can pray together, you share personal things, and you learn they don't run their mouth, so you can kind of share everything, then boom, you got a bestie, right? So early in this process, I was getting acquainted with this guy. Every time I hung out with him, he got offended by something. And at first I was like, oh man, I feel bad. Super likable dude, super fun guy, very spiritual, knew the Bible well. And like, I feel bad, I offended this guy. I didn't mean to offend him. Like, I don't want to do that. So I apologized. Next time we hung out, something else happened. He got upset again. I was like, oh, sorry, man. And it took a little longer to apologize before he was calmed down. I was like, okay, though, that's cool. A few times later, we hung out, and again, he got offended. He was upset by something. So this time it took like an hour and a half to calm this person down. It might have been longer. And we were outside and it was cold. I remember. And it was nighttime and I was like, dude, can't we do this inside? But here's what I realized. My capacity for friendship with this guy had a cap. It had a lid. And the lid was lower than I wanted it to be. And the reason there was a lid is because I didn't really exist to this guy. I never got a turn to share how my life was going because he was too busy being upset. And I realized when I looked at his other relationships, that's what he did. He would get upset all the time or offended or have this new insight or something really important. It was all just melodramatic because he needed to be the center of attention and he needed to be getting constantly affirmed in his relationships. And bro, I can't be your ride or die if it's just a one-way street. You know what I'm saying? So that capped how close we could be. And he ended up not becoming a best friend. So what capped our relationship was his lack of capacity having a relationship because he lacked the ability to see me, the ability to move outside of his own hurts, injuries, traumas, craziness, psycho, whatever. He couldn't get out of that. And so that caps how close we could be. Now imagine somebody who's deeply, deeply depressed, which is a terrible thing to be, right? It's a heavy, heavy burden. And a lot of us have experienced it firsthand. But sometimes you're not the best at giving when you're depressed. And your world becomes very small and very dark. And people are trying to be there for you, but they can't even be there for you. You're so depressed. How much less can you be there for them? So people who are chronically depressed forever, one big challenge is them seeing the friendships they have and cultivating the friendships that are there. Just because the pain caps it. Okay, here's what I want to tell you that holiness is. The reason I want to become a more just, a more compassionate and caring, a more wise, a more diligent and tenacious person is because that increases my capacity to have friendship with other people. That's a big reason. And some of you have never had a strong, close, good friend because you don't know how to be a strong, good person who can be close to other people. And so we need to increase our capacity to experience other people. And that happens through virtue. That happens through being patient, through being compassionate, through being wise, through being calm, through not being upset all the time. Now, does this mean you never get angry, you never get upset, you never get depressed? No, of course not. We live in this stupid world and we're all in the washing machine together tumbling around, right? Like we're all in this, we get that. But you know there's some people who have a lid on how close they can be with you and how many friends they can have. And I know people who have 0 long-term relationships ever in their life. But you need to be people who have a capacity to experience other people because that's where love happens, is in that space. Love happens in that connection. And love happens when you can let the compassion in, when you can let the attention be on you once in a while. And real quick, some of you are so service-oriented because it's a defense mechanism that enables you always to focus on the other person and never acknowledge your own need and depend on other people. So sometimes the most spiritual actions are actually a form of pride. But that's a free bonus thing. If you like that, you can give a little extra in the offering in the back on your way out. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. So when we come up to God, the creator of the universe, who's stronger, God or me? God. It should not take you guys that long to answer that. Yeah, God's way stronger than me, way smarter than me, way more capable of compassion than I am. He's way more wise than I am. So what is God's capacity for friendship? It's basically infinite. So if I'm willing to become holy and grow in virtue, there's no lid to how close I can be with God. And you know an immature spiritual person when you see him because they're always praying and trying to twist God's arm to conform to their stupid little plan that's not even good anyway. And it's always about them and their need. But holiness isn't just following the rules or being a good person or fitting in with the group. Holiness is becoming more and more and more and more like Jesus so that you can experience and be close to God like Jesus was. That's why you want to become holy. That's why you want to be different. And Christians should be different, right? You know the word hypocrite? People say that about Christians all the time, right? Let's think this through. What does hypocrite mean when I say it to a Christian? Does it mean they're worse than other people or the same? The same. So why do we call Christians hypocrites when they're just like everybody else? It's because instinctively we know they're supposed to be different. Instinctively, we know following Jesus is supposed to make a difference. It's supposed to make us better people. Well, now you know why you're supposed to be better people. The church should be different. We should be holy. That's the word. We should be holy. We should be purified. We should be sanctified, consecrated. We should be different. All the old school words are still awesome. We should keep using them. We should be different than other people because it makes the world a better place. It makes us experience life and love more, and it increases our capacity to experience God. And that's what's important to Jesus. What's important to Jesus is that you come back to God and that you are close to God and that you experience God and that you're filled with God and that you're so full of the love of God it spills all over the place as you live your life. And it gets on other people too. His goal was to tear the curtain that separates us from God so that we can have direct access to God and be close to God ourselves. And he hated these rules because he valued that holiness in people to be close to God, experience God, and these people were majoring on the minors and fighting about stupid stuff and distracting people from what really mattered. And we've done that in smaller degrees, haven't we? Man, there was a time where I worked multiple jobs, I ran a small business, I was starting a church, and I was going to school full time, and I had 3 young kids at home. My values were messed up. I spent all my time making money, and then I spent all my other time blowing it on Jack in the Box over in Hilliard. So you know Jack in the Box by Safeway over in Hilliard? We lived right on Empire there, just a couple blocks down in the hood. And here's my day. I would get up and do all this work and do all this stuff. I'd come home. We'd put the kids to bed at 7 o'clock until they were like 20 because we needed the break. We could hear them upstairs. We just turned the TV up and it was no problem. But they were safe. There were bars on the windows. So I'm just kidding. So we put the kids to bed at 7. We turn on The Biggest Loser. I'd do a Jack in the Box run. I'd come back with a number 7, which is a Bacon Ultimate, which is really good. And a large, not a diet at the time. I've switched to diet because I'm diabetic now, but back then I could just eat as much sugar as I wanted because heart attacks are good. And so I'd bring all the food back to my house and we would sit on the couch, watch The Biggest Loser, and eat Jack in the Box. So all the extra money I was making went to Jack in the Box. Seriously, I bought that bobblehead dude his first Ferrari. So that shows you how messed up my values were, because I would work so hard, neglecting my family, neglecting my own spiritual life, just so I could blow the money on food every night. So we get our values messed up, don't we? And sometimes there's extreme examples of this. I've had friends who have been deeply addicted. And they value escaping their pain so much that they'll sacrifice their health, some friendships, sometimes their job. They'll put all kinds of things in danger. Don't worry, it gets better, cutie. So they would sacrifice all kinds of things just for the sake of keeping that addiction going because it's the only thing they trusted to deliver them from all the pain in their life. And you see people lose everything to addiction. And that's a problem in values and priorities. And we've all been messed up in our lives with our values, haven't we? I think we've all been there. Well, here's what I'm suggesting today, and here's what Jesus suggests through this passage. There's a chance you've been neglecting your spiritual life too much. There's a chance you haven't been attending to your soul enough. And there's a chance that you've confused that fitting in with church people with being like Jesus. There's a difference. And so what Jesus would have you do is he would have you pursue holiness, virtue to the utmost. I mean, there's this verse that Paul says. He says, as a pastor, we equip all these people to do all kinds of wonderful things and help people, prophets, evangelists, all this stuff. He says, so that by doing that, every person in church could attain to the full measure of Jesus Christ. That verse is so hard to believe as a pastor. But here's what Paul is saying. Paul is operating under the assumption that every Christian in this room can become like Jesus to the full stature of who Jesus was in every single way. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't feel like I'm there yet. But that's what we're doing here. That's what we're doing is we're pursuing being like Jesus. And so I want you to get this habit in your life where you just talk to God every day. Just talk to him every day. You don't have to talk to me or listen to my sermons or some other radio preacher or whatever. You get to talk to God directly. And talk to God and say, okay, how do I live my life today so that I can become more like Jesus and increase the love in my life? How do I love other people more? And the chances are, if you're hating on somebody, even if you think it's love, it's because you've messed up your priorities and you're focusing on the wrong things. And you do not want to be one of those people who is a terror that's planted by the evil one, right? Last thing here. When we read the Bible, we tend to identify with different people in the stories. Sometimes I identify with the disciples when they don't get what Jesus said, because sometimes Jesus confuses me. Sometimes I identify with Jesus when he's mad at people. And I'm like, yeah, that's right, people are so dumb. Tell them. I hate people, right? But you know who I never identify with? Is the Pharisees and the religious teachers. Which is bizarre because Bible-thumping, devout, evangelical, hardcore Christians like us, we actually have a lot in common with the Pharisees. The Pharisees were very concerned with how the Bible applied to their daily lives. They thought it was very important to pray. They thought it was very important to engage in cultural issues and help the culture be godly. And the Pharisees also thought it was very important to know the Bible and to understand the verses so you could live in the right way and honor God. The Pharisees were the Bible scholars. They were the pastors of the day. And for some reason, we never identify with them. But it might be wise if we did once in a while when we read these passages. You don't want to be in that bucket, do you? So, just talk to God every day and say, okay, how today do I live more loving? If someone's in front of you and they're annoying, say, okay, what does love look like in this situation? Lord, help me. Have mercy on me, a sinner. When you're upset about something, so okay, is this, what I'm about to say, is that showing off my heart or is that expressing the heart of God? Would God also be upset about this or am I being me? How do I be Jesus in this moment? Are the things I'm trying to control now, are these the things that God would try and control in this situation? Am I seeing the person in front of me, which Jesus always did? Just get in this habit of talking to God all the time and saying, okay, how do I love and how do I become like Jesus today? And you will end up with more virtue, with more holiness, which means you'll be able to experience more and more of God. And the goal is this. Jesus said, I never say anything unless the Father tells me to say it. I never do anything unless the Father tells me to do it. And he never sinned. So your goal is to get to this place where you're praying without ceasing and you never say anything unless the Father tells you to say it. You never do anything unless the Father tells you to do it. And your whole life is an expression of God. And you should have that done by Tuesday. It's an aspirational goal, but it's a goal. And some of us forget what Christianity is about. What it's about is worshiping God and expressing that the music in church is about Jesus, the sermons are about Jesus, the lives we live are about Jesus, and everything we do is for Jesus. Jesus is the center and the sum of everything we do. And so if we live for worship, as we grow in holiness, that increases our capacity for worship. So become like Jesus as much as you possibly can. That's your first and most important thing to do with your life. And honestly, if you do that, everything else is going to fall into where it's supposed to be. You'll suffer well when catastrophes happen in your life. You'll persevere well. You'll learn how to make friendships and be connected to other spiritual people. You'll be freed from your addictions, from your angers, and from your hatreds, and from your resentments. And you'll be able to see other people as they are. And you'll also be able to be vulnerable and allow other people to minister to you. So you can not only give the love of God, but experience it yourself. And isn't that where we all want to be? That kind of a life? Let's pray. Lord Jesus, I pray that you would help us to be like you. We see that you had disagreements with people and you made people angry and there's things you couldn't accept. And Lord, one of these things you couldn't accept is us majoring in the minors and getting distracted from what we're actually supposed to be about. So Lord, forgive us for being distracted Christians. Forgive us for being distracted in life. Forgive us for trying to make everything about us. Lord, help us to see you and to be like you and to tend to our souls and to be deeply loving and spiritual people. Help us to be more holy so that we can bless other people and experience you more. And so that our capacity with friendship with you is increased. Lord, help us really, truly to repent of sin. Help us turn away from those things we know that are hurting and destroying our lives. Both the things we do and the things that have been done to us. Lord, help us to heal and to grow and to become whole, holy, godly, loving people. And I pray a pastoral blessing over every soul in this room. Lord, first, for those who have never walked with you, Lord, I thank you that you've brought them to this moment so they can just decide to follow you. Lord, for those who have drifted, I thank you for this moment that they can be drawn back to you and they can recommit their lives to you and follow you again. Lord, for the already devout and those who love you and follow you, Lord, I pray that you would continue to take them to higher levels of holiness and that you would help them to invest in other Christians in this church, that they could also become holy. And I pray for a church full of forgiveness, freed from hate and bitterness and resentment, and a church that can be strong and holy for this world that desperately needs a light in the darkness. So Lord, we offer ourselves to